maybe are asking the question, am I a songwriter? This is an area that you just can get better and better and better at. If you want to make money at it, you're going to have to follow a guideline to it. If you want to have passion at it, and if you want to grow in it, then you can't just look at it as a money factor or a royalty factor or royalty check. Like, why do you want to be a songwriter? Do you want to be a songwriter because there's something? Hey everybody, this is Rita Springer. Welcome once again to the Rita Springer podcast and Worship is My Weapon. This is, I want to call it a repeat podcast, but I did it in the audio version when we just were doing audio for the first year. And so some of those, what I think are kind of important podcasts for especially those musicians out there and songwriters out there, I just thought I'd redo them on video and maybe you can use it as like a tutorial for today. We're going to talk about songwriting. So I just wanted to kind of repeat a few of these different podcasts and this one on songwriting, just for those out there that maybe are asking the question, am I a songwriter? Or making the statement, I'm a songwriter. I'm certainly not one that will ever be tooting my own horn saying, oh gosh, I know everything there is about songwriting. I don't know everything there is to know about songwriting. I don't even feel like I have any kind of a monopoly on songwriting at all. And when I'm looking at myself from even the standpoint of being a successful songwriter, I don't even think I'm that. I think I'm a great songwriter. I think I'm an incredible poet. And I've learned so much along the way. And I just am one of those believers that this is an area that you just can get better and better and better at. And so I think my goal that I set for myself every year in this department of songwriting, because I feel like I've got so many different irons in the fire, I just always try to be like, I want to get better at this. What can I learn this year about songwriting? Not just in technique. A lot for me now in songwriting, it's not much about technique. I think you learn the basis of that, the foundational quality of how to kind of to write a song. And everybody knows that there's the manuscript that men put out there. I say men, not men in general, but just man in general. There's a manuscript for, how to write a top grossing song, how to write the best CCLI song, how to write a perfect radio song. There's all of those different things that we can pull off of. The people have kind of been down that road. They've created the formula or they understand the formula for how-tos. I want to really just put out there, while I understand that, while I see the truth, the reality of those things, that there is a formula, the formula that we're adapting ourselves to in order to have those songs be what they are entitling them as in the formula of the best song or how to write a great song or how to write a great radio song. That's also behind that is somebody saying, hey, this is how you do this. And this is what will happen if you put that song through this kind of platform and this kind of criteria. And then the powers that be behind those things will manufacture a really great song. Yeah. All that stuff is there. If that is your goal, if that is your intention, by all means, grab those things and go after it. The kind of department that I'm in, or the sector of songwriting that I'm in, has always been kind of the Christian, faith-based criteria. Now, I do write pop songs with some writers. I do love writing sync when I have the opportunity to write sync music for TV and film. And I really love writing country music. Those things for me, at this age, having written so much faith-based music and worship music most of my life, are incredibly beautiful breaks for me, because these molds and formulas that now dominate the Christian kind of market can be actually really super tiring for me. And I get kind of bored by it creatively. And so I always come from songwriting more on kind of in this creative realm of, hey, look, are you challenging yourself to be better at these things? Are you challenging yourself to actually go an extra mile? Are you challenging yourself to, to look at something in a way that you've never looked at it before, or write it in a way that it's never been written before? Or are you just reading the manual and going with the manual because you know that that's going to get you radio play, or you know that that's going to get you kind of in this market of being palatable for sales? I do get all that, and I make my living not actually on my royalties, but I make my living on this whole songwriting thing because I am known as a songwriter and a worship leader and a speaker. And so when I go out because those songs have paved a way and it made a foundation for me to do that. But I take it pretty seriously in the sense of my artistry. And I think when I start talking about songwriting, I'm always going to come at it from a really beautiful artistic perspective of creative expression, not reading the manuscript, finding the formula, and writing a perfect song. Do I feel like there is a way to write a perfect song? Absolutely, there's a way to write a perfect song. But sometimes the best songs aren't necessarily the most perfect. But they are songs that from the first line or from the first melody or the way even in a song's production that it can actually lift a heart or take you from one emotion to the next. Those are songs that I'm after listening to, not just in writing. Let's just not talk about me as a writer. I will be sitting on iTunes or going to Spotify, and I will just be looking at indie artists and new up and coming writers and artists. And I've said this, I think, on this podcast before, but one of my favorite podcasts that I listen to is not a Christian podcast, but it's a podcast with Ross Golan, and it's called And the Writer Is. And it's Ross is an incredible pop writer himself, but he interviews incredible artists and writers. And he talks about the journey of some of those songs that we all know or we're listening to that just carry, just have this massive following, and then just carry this posture of good writing. And I love following those things. I love listening to those things. I love listening to how writers think, because there's no two people alike. That's the beauty of how different we are. And I think a lot of us come to the table with an inspiration or with somebody else's dialogue, and we try to write a song based on what somebody else did. And while that really does work, sometimes in the pop world, and a lot of times in worship music, where we are singing the same song over and over and over, and sometimes it's monotonous. But because that song has, again, been followed in a formula pattern, we're watching those songs be the songs that climb, the CCLI charts. Now, I'm not a radio listener. I don't listen to the radio. If you're going to classify radio as Spotify or, just Apple Music, then yeah, I listen to the radio, because I'll just call out an artist to Siri or call out an artist to Alexa, and just have them play that artist, and then they'll play anything surrounding that artist. And so a lot of my actually really beautiful finds come from that. But when I'm listening to, if I'm calling out a worship artist or a Christian artist on these platforms, and then they start playing the song, I realize that the song that I asked them to play usually will play again every 30 minutes. And when I'm listening to the radio, it plays again every 30 to 40 minutes, if not sooner. And that always kind of stirred me. It's like, why this song was on 30 minutes ago, why is it on again? And a lot of that, I think, is because an artist is signed to a label that is connected to a publisher, that's connected to a radio station or a radio platform. And so there's the formula. So we're following the formula for some of these things. And so there is also the way that we listen to things and the way that our brain works, and radio knows this, that and Spotify knows this, and Apple Music knows this, that your brain is going to, when it relates or it clicks into something and you hear the same thing over and over and over and over, your brain automatically files that into, oh, this is familiar, this must be something that is popular based on how many times they play it. And so there is a mental thing that we are all going through when we're listening music, because this is how companies actually get you to look for the song or download the song, or as worship leaders do the song on Sunday morning, because there is a man somewhere, or man somewhere is dictating to us as the listeners that this is the next song that we're listening to. This is the next thing that's going to be heard in church. And so when you play that in church, it all works together, right? You listen to it on the radio, and then all of a sudden you go to church and they're playing it on the church. And so what that intake is in your head is a way that scientifically is proven to tell you, oh, this is good stuff. Like this is going to be common. Hey, everybody, I want to take a minute to talk to those of you and encourage those of you who maybe you're planting a church, you're on staff at a church, you're in the children's department of a church, and you run and oversee the curriculum at your kids' division of church. There is some friends of mine that have developed this curriculum that I just think it's the best curriculum for kids' church out there. It's called Amazing Kids. It is a Bible-based, spirit-filled curriculum. I know these guys. They are incredible creatives. Connie and Tyler Bates are the genius behind this, and they just love serving kids and serving God in serving our kids. If this is something that your church is looking for, if it's something that you as a pastor of your children's department is looking for, an enriched Bible-based curriculum to bring to your children's department of your church or your church plant, this is something that I would highly recommend that you do. I fully believe and back what these guys do. My own kid was under it for years, and it's just the way that they're doing it right now is just beautiful. So you can find all that information if you go to amazing.kids, and there's a kind of a special discount code that you can get, or a promotional code that you can get if you type in Rita in the promotional area of that, and they'll give you special pricing on that. But it's something that I just highly recommend. And kids are so important. They're so important in our churches. What we do when we drop our kids off in church and what's happening in the Sunday school area is so important for your children. And this curriculum is one of the best, and you will love it for your church. So check that out. It's incredible, and I back it 100%. And so I want to let you know that, because I know that's part of our system. I know that's part of what is out there. I know that's part of what we bow to as artists and as writers. But I just really want to challenge those of you that are coming into this and asking yourself the question, man, I want to be a songwriter. Am I a songwriter? Will I ever be a good songwriter? I want to challenge you as somebody who's been in the business for quite a long time, and somebody who really actually loves the creative process of songwriting, not to put yourself in and pitch yourself into a kind of a corner of, oh, I'm going to write like this because I want to be like this. I want to look like this, or I want to make money at this. And so if you want to make money at it, you're going to have to follow a guideline to it. If you want to have passion at it, and if you want to have endurance in it, and if you want to grow in it, then you can't just look at it as a money factor or a royalty factor or a royalty check. You have to look at it as the process of, man, I want to be a really great songwriter. How can I bring what I have to the table and actually change the way that it's done and change the world, perhaps be the next, we've got the historical landmarks of some of the most incredible pop groups that come on the scene, most from England, in my own history. And the beauty of that is the radical transforming thing that these artists and these bands and these writers do in our communities, in our societies, then all of a sudden what they have brought in changes the whole gamut. I lived in Seattle, Washington for a good 10 years of my life. And it was a great place to live as a 23-year-old. Because Seattle at that point, it's not really, Seattle can be cool. The Northwest can be a really cool place. I think COVID's really messed it up royally, but there used to just be such an incredible music scene there. And obviously Seattle is where kind of grunge was birthed out of there. And I was a nanny for some wealthy oil barons there. And I didn't live with them, but I lived a lot of my nights in that house because they were gone a lot. But there was a place in Seattle, really beautiful place in Seattle, that they had their house, and it kind of overlooked the water. And our neighbors down the street to that house that I was working in and half the time living in were Kurt and Courtney Cobain. And Kurt was born in 1967, so was I. He was born in April, same month as I was. So I always felt kind of kin to Kurt because we were born in the same year, in the same month. And there was something about what Kurt was doing at the time that while I wasn't a grunge music listener, I've never written grunge music. I've never listened to heavy metal or anything like that. It's just not my thing. But again, as a musician, I can appreciate it. But there was something about that era of what was happening in Seattle with grunge music and with the likes of Pearl Jam and Nirvana, coming onto the scene. You could just feel the energy and the atmosphere that something was happening, something was shifting, and being in that age of your early 20s and kind of being part of a movement in a city where this whole new thing was coming on the scene, and it was just taking my generation by storm. I was paying attention to all of that. And I had so many hours in this house, especially during the summer months when my boss was gone, and that I had to think about this stuff and pray about this stuff. And I remember it was in that house that the Lord started speaking to me about what was coming in music and what was coming in what I would see in the industry with songwriting and artistry and creative expression and what God wanted to do with it. And so it was kind of this beautiful season to be alive, hearing God talk about music. He wasn't talking to anybody else about what he was talking to me about, because I was having conversations and asking some of my peers and some of my friends, like, is God talking to you about this? Is God talking to me about this? And they were like, no, God's not talking to me about that. Sometimes you would find somebody that was, that you could talk to, with things that the Lord was saying about what was coming. He was always talking about what was coming. And I love these conversations. And I remember that he spoke to me one night about Kurt Cobain, and he talked to me about how much he loved Kurt and how that anointings are irrevocable, and that Kurt had this incredible ability. I wouldn't call Kurt a great songwriter. I wouldn't even call him a great musician. But in saying that, there are so many interviews where Kurt himself never thought he was a great musician. He never thought he was a great songwriter. In fact, I remember one of the last interviews that he had given before his tragic death. The reporter, I remember the interview in my mind that, the reporter was asking him, man, what do you think about, this new album or this, what you guys are up to? And I don't even know the right words. I'd have to go back and rewatch this interview, but he was kind of like, we suck. Like, he was just like, he dogged on himself. He dogged on the band. He's like, we don't know what we're doing. Like, we don't know why we're even in the position that we're in. And I actually loved that about him. I love the fact that he knew what he had that was good as far as talent, but he also knew that what he had that was relevant to a generation. And I think that his anointing, because I do believe that all gifts are given by the Lord, and I think that the compromise is given over to hell. So let's remember that. The enemy cannot take credit for our gifts. All gifts, all good and perfect gifts are from the Lord, but to be compromising of those gifts, that's where kind of hell comes in. So is music compromising? Yes. Can hell compromise our music? Yes. Can he compromise the arts? Absolutely. And I think as Christians, we get so religious about it that we're like, stop listening to this and stop listening to this. And we demonize people, which I do understand why religion does that. But I'm always very slow to demonize something when I know that the original point of birth in those things really kind of stems back to the Lord, that every good and perfect gift comes from God. Individuals can taint that, compromise that, sell that out. And I just think as the church, what we need to do is we need to pray the arts back into the originality of what the gifting actually really derives from, and not be so vocal about demonizing people and warning people about artists, but just really kind of like praying for the industry and the art industry in and of itself, because the industry of art, movies, motion pictures, photography, music, all of the things, theater, all of those things I believe are such incredible pieces of language that God's going to use in the latter days of how he communicates and how he saves and how he pulls in a harvest. And I say that because of my conversations with the Lord. But I say that because it's the only thing out there that the saved and the unsaved do together, and that they love together. You know, we're not going into a theater, if you go to the theaters anymore. You know, we don't sit in the theater and know that everybody in that theater watching the next Marvel movie or, you know, the next Star Wars, classic is saved. We don't go in thinking, oh, I'm going in with a bunch of saved people. We go in because we're looking for 2 hours to be entertained by someone else's phenomenon of the way that they see things, the way that they've written something, the way that they've shot something, and the way that they tell a story. And that's anointing. That's like gifting. That's talent. There's some people have the most incredible way to bring imagery to life. And all of us collectively love that. All of us love a good Coldplay ticket. All of us love to go see U2. You know, all of us love when we're in New York, we'll take in a play. You know, this is a bilingual language that art is speaking. And I think the church needs to wake up and understand that that is one of the biggest languages that we all speak together. Why wouldn't the Lord start using that more abundantly and more profoundly to actually reach the lost? And so I've been ministered to sometimes through some pop songs and some indie songs that were not written by Christian artists, but that were written by true, actually, writers who aren't afraid to let their poetry tell their story and actually draw the heart of people. As songwriters, what we are first is we are emotion carriers. And we're not just like treasure hunt, word treasure hunt people in lyrics and words, but we're emotional people that are have this gifting to take people on an emotional journey with us because of the way that we paint a picture with our melodies and our words. And so I want to just like throw that out there to all you, especially all you new songwriters, because or your young ones. I love the young ones because you guys are in such a combustible state right now. You're all ready to blow at something, and you're so anxiety driven about so many different things. And to me, that's like, okay, if there's so much anxiety, if there's so much isolation, if there's so much like mental health issues, what is that saying to me on the spiritual side of it? I always do this. I go back to the Lord and I'm like, why is this generation so like hacked by anxiety? Do I understand anxiety? Do I understand mental process? Absolutely. Do I understand panic? Absolutely. Lived in a hellhole in 2023 and wrote a whole record about it. So yeah, I understand it. But as someone who lives with great balance, you've heard me talk about this before, I'm going to look not only for balance in my life, but balance in my art. And balance that isn't like everything has to be so, because we're coloring outside the lines all the time. But the balance of being able to be someone in the making of my art or the writing of my songs that has an intentional layout to it, where I'm like, I'm not going to say this the way I've said it before. I'm going to take it a step further, because knowing that the listener, some of the listening that happens to my music will hit people in a different way, because part of my art is mastering emotion and understanding how to navigate an emotion and then translate that emotion to the listener, so that the listener now is 100% with you in a boat out in the middle of the ocean, and you're sinking, and what are you going to do? And that's actually the illusion that that artistry kind of gives the artist, is how are you going to tell that story? How do you want to tell that story? And are you going to be the best at telling that story? And so if there's competition in this ever for me, it is, how am I going to tell this story in this song in a way that it's never been told before, that will also provide and gravitate and collect an audience that wants to go with it and wants to listen to it, but then is specific to maybe the ones on the sidelines where all the others are gathered around listening for one thing, but those guys are listening for just solely something completely different. And can I do something that actually gathers those people as well? Hey, everybody, this is Rita Springer. Thank you so much for coming in and joining me on the podcast here with Worship is My Weapon. There's a lot of things I'm doing right now, and one of the things that we provide alongside this podcast is a newsletter that we do, that we send out to those of you that are subscribed, where I just answer questions and kind of give you information, and sometimes you guys are able to write in with questions that you just are curious about. We love that. We love that interaction. I actually love to interact with those of you that want something a little bit more beyond the podcast. So if that's you, make sure to get our newsletter, sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the newsletter, and stay in touch with all the things that we're doing here on the podcast in that newsletter. I know that Swift and different other artists, you know, their artistry is so deep within them that when they write their sagas, I call them, like their albums, because every album is kind of a saga of a season of a life. They'll put secret things in there. I know Brooke Lidgertwood has kind of started to really do that with the albums that she just is calling, 7 and 8, and I think she's going to do 9 and 10, and these are like almost like secret passages into something, because as an artist, there is a story that you're telling, but you don't want to fully tell it to the listeners. You want the listeners to actually jump on board in the mystery of it and help solve the mystery of it, or help or come alongside you in the process of how you built it, and then find that same kind of maze, go through that same kind of maze that you are doing as the writer writing it. I'm trying to look for those people. And I think that those of you that are so kind of like the young, you're teens, you're coming in, you're wanting to know how to write. You're geared toward pop, you're geared toward rap. My son's a rapper. And we have these conversations all the time about songwriting. And I'm a little bit hardcore with him because rap is not my field, but I have an immense appreciation for rap, because rap are, the baseline for rap and trap music. It's a great study if you go study it. I remember taking him to the trap house in Atlanta, and it was fascinating. Yes, there's drugs embedded in it, and weaponry and cartel things and all kinds of bad stuff. But here is the reality of music and the power of what it really is to people who aren't buying into Christianity much. And that is that music is, for so many in poverty and in such dire circumstances, music in sports is really, art in sports is really a way out of that life, because it's part of our dream process. It's part of our, when I grow up, I'm going to get out of this by blankety blank diddy blank. And when I grow up, for me, it was, when I grow up, I'm going to get out of this poverty. I'm going to be an actress. So art was what I set my sights on, to actually change the surroundings of my youth so that I would never have to actually be stuck in that world. My dream world was that world. And man, give it up for art, because art was an escape. Now, I don't think that God intended artistry to be our escape. I don't think that when he was creating the universe, he was using his creative skills to escape. I think he was building something on foundations of absolute stunning beauty, to tell the story about his nature and his character, and to keep us in awe of him as the creator. And that is not lost on me. I just won't let that get lost on me. I am stunned by God's artistry constantly. I will not go to the beach ever and not stand at the vast, shoreline where I'm, brought to memory in scripture where God says to the water, you can come to this place and you can't go any further. And that's not lost on me. I look at that it's just this stunning, artistic, creative expression of it. And I'm like, you're so vast, you're so big, there's got to be more. And so I think my growth as a songwriter is because I just think there's more. There's more out there. And I think in this first podcast of this, for those of you that are kind of listening and joining in from the artist perspective, or maybe you are a parent of a kid who just, all they do is sing, or all they do is dance, and all they do is want to act, or all they do is want to take photographs, or all they do is want to, draw. I think it's really good, especially for parents who don't have that vein. And you're like, well, I mean, I hear this said, I've heard this my whole life. It's like, I don't have a creative bone in my body. I think that is just such a drastic curse to put over yourself. Because what you're basically saying is, whatever you've seen is creative, and you've dissed yourself from it, saying, oh, I could never do that. I mean, I have friends that are insane painters, and I've said, oh gosh, it's one talent I just wasn't given. I wasn't given that. And then, this year when I was going to ask a friend to paint the Raven for the Fed by Ravens record, Holy Spirit just said to me, why don't you paint it? And I was like, because I don't paint. And he was like, why do you say you don't paint? You've just never picked up a paintbrush. And I was like, God, I have never had a lesson. I don't paint. And then I thought, what am I doing? I've told the Lord I would do everything that he told me I could possibly do. And so I picked up a paintbrush, and I literally could hear the Lord kind of like leading me into how to paint. And getting over the first hurdle of being like, oh, this isn't that scary. And then being like, why am I dissing myself? Why am I saying I can't paint? There's no, it's like, no, will I ever be like a gallery filled artist? No, probably not. But there is something so tranquil that I found in painting now where, even last night I was having a really hard day, and I just was like, fidgeting. When I get really, out of sorts, I clean, or I do laundry, or I just obsess. I just sit down and obsess and get sad. It's the melancholic four in me. And I just felt like the Lord was like, go paint, go paint, go paint. And so I was like, I'm going to go paint. And so I went up and I just started painting for 2.5 hours. I just painted. And when I was washing off the paintbrushes and putting everything away, I was like, whoa, thank you, God. Like, thank you, God, for that outlet. Artistry is an outlet. Songwriting has been an outlet. There's a different thing that happens to me in songwriting than it does in now even painting. But our artistry is not centered on whether we're good at it or not. It's whether we're willing, I think, to be better at it than when we first started. And looking at what God has done, I just don't see I don't see art as being made or creation being made as a way of escape, but I do think it's the mercy of God that he has given us art as a way of progressing through our pain and finding a handle in our loneliness, or getting through, just trauma and things like that. Art is used in all of those areas of therapy. And so I'm trying to lay this foundation of almost like inviting you into this space of seeing songwriting from a perspective of, wow, like what's God's intention in melodies? What's God's intention in holding back? I mean, there are vaults, I believe in heaven, had a dream about it once, these vaults in heaven where there are songs being kept until those of us actually are willing to stand up and start writing them. And I don't think that God's, when I was talking about the era of Cobain, and God really speaks to me about the songwriter, about the culture of songs shifting an atmosphere and shifting communities and shifting cities. Cobain's life was pretty sad, but I remember reading up on some of his past stuff, and he was surrounded by faith in his early days. And I believe I read an article once about him being almost prophesied over that there was something God wanted to do in his life. You cannot have that kind of publicity, that kind of, he was literally known as the king of grunge. And man, I'm telling you, there's so many things that at 23, 24, when Smells Like Teen Spirit came on the, I didn't listen to that kind of music, but I was mesmerized by MTV's like Unplugged series when he walked on that stage and he just started singing Smells Like Teen Spirit. And I just was like, this guy is insane. Like from an artist perspective, this guy, he's not trying to be anything that he's not. And what he's doing in the moment is he's setting a course for a whole new level of what's coming. And there was something about my generation that we grabbed a hold of something in artistry and saying it the way we wanted to say it and doing it the way we wanted to do it. And there were some really good aspects of that. Were there, really sad things about that? Absolutely. Again, because the compromise of things, can lead you down a really dark path. And some of those songs, maybe most of those Nirvana songs were kind of dark songs, but it was coming from a dark mind. It was coming from a mind that was processing his own darkness. And again, these are conversations that I have with Justice as a rapper, because you look at the rap world, and that is a world of just trying to get out of one thing into another. And so you're using a cadence and a guideline to say things the way it's never been said before. Rap doesn't have a real big formula. I've listened to a lot of it with Justice. In fact, recently, Justice and I were talking about the war between Kendrick Lamar and Drake. And I just was sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, it's, music has become, it's even become this, the rap world is so different, right? You can diss people in your raps and be known for the dissing of your songs. It's just this crazy way of expression. And while we can, as Christians, be like, it's whether it's sin or whether it's not, I'm not looking at it from that perspective in this. I'm actually want to talk to you from the creative perspective of pull yourself into the realm of why are we attracted or why are we drawn to these things? We're drawn to an aspect of artistry in it, and an aspect of what an artist has to say and the power behind a writer and the power behind an artist. Hey, everybody. I want to tell those of you that are musicians and specifically piano players about something that I've been using that really has transformed and changed a recording process for me. There is a company that I found that I've partnered with that has been lending me this incredible piano bar, is what they call it. It's from Earthworks Audio. You can find them online, earthworksaudio.com. And this is how this piano bar works. As you can see, this piano bar fits inside of a piano like so. I think it would work for an upright as well. I have a baby grand. This bar just sits right in between the piano edges, and it has these two mics. It's a very, very sensitive piano bar. It just sits right in this piano bar, and then it just has this connecting wire that comes out for all the plugins that you would need to plug into your interface. It's super easy. It's incredibly convenient. If you are an acoustic piano player, if you have a home studio and you're looking to mic an acoustic piano, Earthworks Audio is one of your best bets. Check them out online. Yes, would I love for you guys to do this in the positive realm? Would I love for you guys to go into film and TV and take the Lord with you? Don't take Christian easy, this is just, I'm just going to say it because, I'm just going to be honest. I think faith films are getting better. I think Christian films are getting better. But I think when they're really, really great, their emphasis isn't strong on the religious dialogue of it all. That just turns me off. I know maybe that makes me sound like I'm a weirdo in religion, but it's really the word religion I hate. Man, you bring me a great movie with a solid script, a solid line, a solid storyline. I did think that I think the movie's called I Can Only Imagine, from Mercy Me's release, I believe, which I recorded that song. I should probably know that, but I really did enjoy the movie. I thought it had incredible. It told the story really well, but it also didn't come off heavy religious because the movies that do just kind of drive me crazy. So we're getting better at that. We're getting better at telling the story. We're getting better at hiring actors that actually can act in Christian movies. We're getting better at soundtracks on Christian movies. We're getting better at those things. And I think it's because we're discarding this kind of, it's got to look like this and act like this and be like this. And I just don't understand that, having the creator as my God who made the universe outside, but we can't seem to get a good script that has any good dialogue in a Christian film. But then you go and you watch Star Wars and you watch Dune, or you watch, a Maverick Marvel movie, or you watch just a really great, film that's up for an award that's just classically beautifully done. And you're like, what's the diff or what's the difference? And I think the difference is, as Christians, we put ourselves in a box, and we only communicate, and we articulate, and we become an artist within that box. And I just don't think God's putting us in boxes. I think God wasn't in a box himself. I mean, he created the universe. He created everything visually that you see, and every knee will have to bow, and every tongue will have to confess at the end of their life that God gave them the artistry and the innovation for making every invention and coming up with every artistic thing that people come up with. So I feel like I'm on a bandwagon here, and I'm on this pedestal of rant. But there is this part of me that I just am like, come on, let's do better. Let's get into this. Let's become better songwriters. I mean, I've been so I'm in this publishing world with Christian music, and Fed by Ravens, I didn't have a label. And I think, honestly, I'm just going to be honest with you. I've said it here on before. I'll say it again, that I guess because I didn't have a label, I was just like, I'm free falling. I just was like, I'm out. I'm out. Because there's a sense of loyalty and a sense of honor that I carry all the time. And it's like, well, you're with the label and the labels wants this and the label's pushing for that and it's pushing for that. And these kind of songs kind of don't come in the guideline, even though I've had incredible labels that are like, yeah, we think that's great. We think that's great. But I remember having the conversation when Battles was done with Gateway, because Gateway Church was the label behind that. And, the conversation was how is Defender going to work? How's the song Defender going to work? And I knew Defender was out of the box. I knew it was out of the box. We hadn't really finished it before we recorded it. And they were like, we think maybe you should take Defender off the record. And I fought for Defender to be on the record. And it wasn't that Gateway at the time was like, we don't like the song. It wasn't that at all. I think it was like, can you walk us through your idea of the song and what you feel like this song is geared up for? And they just really needed to know what the song was going to end up looking like and where it was, because there were some things in the song with the cutting the head off my enemy that didn't really gel well with a lot of congregational goers. And when you don't use that kind of language, even though it's right in scripture, but you're not using that kind of language like a song playing every 30 minutes to a group, to accrue people to listen to it, to know that it's like normal, it's normal, it's normal. When we're not using, scriptural content normally in our congregations, and we're not teaching scripture, and we're not talking about enemies' heads being cut off, and those things in scripture from the pulpit, sometimes singing about them can jar people. And so I get it. As a writer, I get it. So as we start this conversation in songwriting, I wanted this kind of first podcast here that we're doing on video to be really about the challenging of you as the songwriter. Why do you want to be a songwriter? Like, why do you want to be a songwriter? Do you want to be a songwriter because there's something in your veins that you just know? Like, when I hear music, something happens to my body. Something happens to my brain. When I listen to these certain rhythms, when these certain melody lines hit me, something happens to the internal parts of my being. Then I want to say to you, okay, welcome to the club. Like, join the bus, get on the bus, welcome to the club. For those of you that are just like, I don't know, I've sat in church and I've looked up and I'm like, I want to play an instrument, I want to play music, I want to be like that. If you look at it from the visual standpoint and you're like, I want to be a songwriter, I want to write songs, but you really don't have the passion for it, it's going to be a long walk for you, because I really do think that true artistry has to burn in your bones. And even coming into it, if it's something that you're to pursue, but you aren't aware of it, but it starts getting on you and getting on you and getting on you and getting on you, get on the bus, welcome to the club. Because I do think it's a progressive thing. We get better and better and better at it. If as an artist or a songwriter, you just continue to do the same thing. In fact, in one of my records that I released years and years ago, before I did it, the Lord said, you're gonna do this record like you've done nothing else before, and you're not allowed to write in the same way that you've written before. And I was like, well, what does that mean? And he was like, well, you aren't going to write these songs on the piano. You can't sit at the piano. I'm like, I don't play another instrument. And the Lord's like, well, then figure it out. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, this is weird. What are you saying? And he was like, I want you to expand your artistry. I want you to expand your songwriting. I don't want you to become stagnant in just offering me the same thing over and over and over because you're too lazy to find your artistry. He's like, I want you to go beat on a wall. And if you go beat on a wall, maybe I'll throw you a melody line. And I was like, okay. And I'm crazy. So I was just like, I'm crazy enough to try this. So I remember just beating on the kitchen table and being like, feeling like so stupid and just beating out a rhythm on the kitchen table. And all of a sudden this melody comes through the window. And I just wrote a whole song while I was beating on the kitchen table. And then, I wrote This Blood, that hymn, just walking around the room one day, because at that point I had somebody else sitting at the piano, and I would just like find melody lines and start singing, and the person on the piano would be like, I think you're in the key of G, and then they would just try to find out what I was singing. But what I knew is I couldn't sit at the piano to write that record. I had to do it in a way that never done before. Those songs that were found for that record would have never been found if I'd been sitting at the piano. So if you are a songwriter in the beginning stages or in the middle stages where you're like, like, I don't want to stay the same. Like, I want to grow in this. I want to learn in this. And you have almost like this insatiable hunger to progress in just your creative idea of songwriting, your creative idea of how to find it. I got friends, and Justice does this sometimes, but I know people who they carry their phones around with them all the time, and they just record everything. They record birds, they record trains, they record, all kinds of things. And then they loop them into their music, and they allow their surroundings to actually breed creative expression to them. Because when it's ciphered into their computers and into their loops, all of a sudden this magic happens. Like, come on, youth, like, this is your season. This is your breaking out of anxiety. I don't know what Michelangelo thought of when he was doing the painting of the Sistine Chapel. Like, I don't know half these artists when they were painting things that they would never know how amazing their paintings are. But I can tell you they were processes, and they were doing processing, and they were processing and processing and processing. And in their processing, they got better and they got better. And maybe they didn't have any notoriety when they were processing, but I can tell you that when they looked back, and when people looked back at it, they saw genius, imagery there because of the foundation and the truth and the authenticity of process. And I think it's a mind game change. So this is part one of songwriting. We'll do two more, and we'll really get into the techniques of it. Again, I don't think I own the skinny on this, but there's a huge swell in my heart to just call out to you, especially young songwriters like my son, and just tell you, maybe your parents never told you, or maybe your pastors aren't telling you, or maybe your teachers aren't telling you, or the people around you aren't telling you, but if you just walk to a rhythm that's different than anybody else, that's okay, because it's probably because you were made that way, and God has his own artistry that he's bringing out of you, and he just wants you to actually plug into him and say, okay, God, here I am. What do I carry that I have to offer on the table of what's happening in the arts today? So thanks for joining on this one, and let's just trail down this road together.